The bass throbbed like a heartbeat behind her as Sophia stepped out of the crowded Berlin nightclub, her heels clicking sharply on the damp concrete. The flashing lights and pulsing music chased her into the night, but she didn't look back. In her right hand, she clutched a nearly empty bottle of liquor, swinging slightly with every unsteady step. The cold air bit at her skin, but her expression remained cold, detached. Across the street, a group of men in long white robes walked calmly, their presence so out of place amidst the chaos of the city nightlife. Sophia narrowed her eyes at them, her lips curling into a sarcastic smile. "Why do you always look so holy?" she muttered bitterly. "What are you hiding behind all that peace?" She took one last swig from the bottle, tilting her head back with defiance. One of the men, calm-faced, maybe her age, looked at her for a moment. His eyes weren't judgmental, nor were they warm. They were simply steady. He didn't say a word. Just nodded slightly, and then looked away. That silent gaze bothered her more than any insult would have. The next morning, Sophia sat on a bench in the city park, her hoodie pulled low, sunglasses masking her tired, swollen eyes. She wasn't sure how she got there. The night before felt like fog, sticky, dark, and full of nothing. Her chest ached in a way no hangover ever had. "God, if you're real, then why am I so hollow?" she whispered, voice cracking. A presence stirred beside her. 2 benches away sat the same man from the night before. Sophia looked at him sideways. "Are you here to judge me now too?" He didn't turn. "Not everything needs a reply. Silence can be louder than noise." His voice was calm, not patronizing. Sophia let out a dry, sarcastic laugh. "Let me guess, that's from your holy book, right?" He still didn't look at her. Just gave the slightest nod and stood to leave. "Hey! Wait!" she called, surprising herself. "You're a Muslim, right?" He turned just slightly. "Yes." "So? Want to argue with me? Convert me? Preach at the sinner?" "No." He shook his head. "I don't argue with people who are asking sincerely. And I never preach to those who've stopped asking at all." Sophia sipped bitter coffee from a paper cup. "I've stopped asking because every answer I got was fake." He sat back down, slowly. "Then why are you still talking?" She frowned. "That means," he said gently, "you haven't really stopped." "Not completely." Her instinct was to fire back with sarcasm. But something about his tone, unforced, quiet, unbothered, left her disarmed. "I hate religion," she said flatly. "Yours included." He nodded. "That's your right. But hating something without knowing it is like rejecting a book without ever opening the cover. Don't compare religion to a book. Then what would you compare it to?" She had no answer. He didn't press. He just sat there quietly. After a pause, he added, "I've seen you before. Near the station mosque. Late at night. You stand at the back, like you're hiding." Sophia's eyes flashed with embarrassment. "So what? Doesn't mean anything. I wasn't judging. Just observing. That place, it's not for hiding. It's for peace." Sophia laughed. Not a joyful laugh, a broken one. "Peace? You ever sit in a bar at 3 a.m.? Everyone says they're at peace too. But they look empty. Just like me." He finally looked at her, directly. "Maybe that's because the places you choose aren't places meant to bring you home." That line landed like a punch. She said nothing. He stood again. "If you really want to talk, I'll be at the mosque tomorrow. Not to convert you. Just talk." She watched him walk away. Not a single backward glance. The next evening, Sophia stood across the street from the mosque. The sky was turning purple with dusk. She was dressed in an oversized hoodie and leggings, hoping to blend in. Her hand held an unlit cigarette, fingers rolling it nervously. As the call to prayer echoed through the air, the cigarette fell to the pavement. Her feet didn't move. At the doorway, Rifki, she now knew his name, saw her. He didn't smile, didn't wave. Just nodded once. A silent message, "It's your choice." She swallowed hard and took a step. Then another. Inside, she sat at the far end of the women's prayer area. Some women glanced her way, curious, but said nothing. The silence felt less judgmental than she feared. More watchful. After the prayer, Rifki met her with 2 glasses of water, sitting at a respectful distance. "You came," he said softly. She nodded once, eyes fixed on the Arabic calligraphy covering the wall. "I don't understand a word," she said, "but somehow it doesn't feel foreign." "You don't need to understand it yet," he replied. "This place isn't asking you to be anyone else. Just yourself. If you want to learn." She looked down. "I don't believe in religion. But I'm tired of feeling empty." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into a small bag and pulled out a book, wrapped in plain brown paper. "This isn't to convince you. It's not for belief. It's just something to test." She took it slowly, no words. Just stared at the cover, then tucked it under her arm as she left. Outside, the sky had darkened. She walked home, clutching the book to her chest, never placing it in her bag. As if she wanted it to be closer than her things. At the bus stop, she opened it to a random page. "Truth doesn't need defenders. But humans always seek to justify themselves." Her breath caught. She read the line 3 times. Then, like holding something too hot, she shut the book. Her hands were shaking. That night, back in her tiny rented apartment, Sophia sat on the floor in dim light. She read a page, stopped. Read again, mumbled to herself. Some parts she hated. Others felt like someone was speaking to her in a language beyond words. She didn't cry. But her eyes burned. At 2 a.m. the lights were off, but her mind was racing. Thoughts of death. Life. The Creator. The illusion of control. And that man, Rifki, with his strange calm. "If this is all a lie, why do I feel shaken?" she whispered to the dark. Then, for the first time in years, she folded her hands. Not to pray. Not yet. Just to stop them from trembling. The morning light poured into Sophia's apartment like a slow confession. She hadn't slept much. Her body ached from sitting on the floor for hours, reading a book she wasn't sure she even believed in. The brown paper-wrapped pages still lay beside her, slightly bent, like they had been held too tightly by hands that didn't know what they were looking for. Sophia stared at her laptop screen. A blank document blinked at her, cursor waiting for a thought, a purpose. She was supposed to be editing a campaign brief. Instead, she sat motionless, lost in a sentence from the book that still echoed in her mind. "Truth doesn't need defenders." She closed the laptop gently and stood. Her feet led her to the bookshelf near her bed, where a long-forgotten Bible rested under a stack of old college essays. Dust clung to its surface. She opened it randomly, reading line after line. But something felt off. Not wrong, just distant. Like reading something she once memorized but had never really understood. She began marking verses. Highlighting phrases. Then comparing them to notes she'd scribbled down from the new book. Her breath quickened. Why does this say one thing here, but contradict itself elsewhere? She flipped back and forth, unsure whether to be afraid or curious. By dusk, she was back in the city park. This time she carried a notebook and both books, one in each hand. She sat under the same tree, where she'd seen Rifki days ago. When he arrived, he was holding a plastic bag with a few pieces of bread and a bottle of water. He placed them beside her without saying a word. Sophia didn't look up immediately. She was flipping through her notes, frustrated. "I wasn't searching for answers," she said softly. "But now I'm drowning in questions." Rifki sat beside her. "That's a good place to be," he said. "Most people search for comfort, not truth. But truth isn't always comforting." She looked at him. "The more I read, the more betrayed I feel." He didn't respond right away. "I found entire verses that were changed in later versions," she continued. "Altered. Removed. Footnotes replacing meaning. This isn't about faith anymore, it's about honesty. And I feel like I've been lied to all my life." Her voice cracked. "Maybe," Rifki said gently, It's not a false faith. Just incomplete knowledge. She sat in silence, rubbing her forehead like she could erase the tension. If this is all wrong, she began, voice barely audible, then my entire life is built on sand. It's better to realize that now, Rifki replied, looking toward the darkening sky. Then when it's too late. Sophia's hands trembled. She clutched the book tightly. I'm not ready to lose everything I've ever known. No one ever is, Rifki said. But not everything you leave behind is worth mourning. That night she stood in front of her bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection. She removed her earrings, one by one. Opened the cabinet above the sink and stared at the lineup of glass bottles, vodka, rum, perfume, memories. One by one, she placed them in a garbage bag. Not in anger, but in quiet acceptance. She sat back on the floor, opened the book Rifki had given her, and on the inside of the back cover she wrote, If truth costs me everything, is it still worth it? She folded her legs, placed her forehead gently on the prayer mat she had bought that morning, and stayed in that position for a long time. No words. No ritual. Just silence. And surrender. The next few days were a blur of quiet resistance. She avoided the bar on her street, even though its neon glow still called to something deep in her. She began dressing differently, not because someone told her to, but because the mirror demanded it. One day, her mother called. Are you still with those Arab friends? Sophia's grip tightened on the phone. I'm just studying, she replied. Studying what? How they think we're infidels. I'm not looking for enemies, Mom, she said. I'm looking for truth. For peace. The line went dead. Sophia stared at her screen for minutes. Her heart didn't break, but it cracked, just enough to let light in. At university, people began whispering. Some stared. A few professors seemed unsure how to approach her anymore. Sophia didn't flinch. She wore a long black jacket, a loose scarf around her head, and an expression that said, I don't need your approval. One evening she sat on her balcony, a book of Quranic interpretations on her lap. As she wrote notes in the margin, she looked down at her own hand. It moved with purpose, scribbling thoughts that a month ago would have terrified her. When did I become this? She whispered. She smiled. A strange smile. Like she had found someone she'd been searching for, herself. That weekend, she sat alone at a quiet cafe. A black coffee sat untouched in front of her. Her phone buzzed. A message from Rifki. If you still have questions, I'm at the library until 5. She stared at the text, then typed her reply. I'm coming. But she didn't send it. Not right away. Eventually, she stood up. The coffee was cold. Her questions weren't. When she entered the library, Rifki was already there, seated at his usual table. He nodded once when he saw her, a gesture of quiet welcome. I don't have all the answers, he said, but I'm ready to listen. Sophia pulled out her notebook. It was filled with underlines, scribbles, arrows, chaos begging for clarity. If Islam is the truth, she began, then why is it portrayed so badly in the West? Rifki calmly drew a diagram on a blank sheet. Because what's visible is not always what's representative, he said. Loud voices drown out sincere ones. She nodded slowly. And the Qur'an, she continued, why hasn't it changed like other books? Because preserving the words means preserving the meaning, Rifki said. If you allow changes, you allow misinterpretation. Their discussion stretched into the evening. Questions piled on top of questions. But this time, they felt lighter. Like stepping stones rather than walls. Before leaving, Rifki said one last thing. If you still have doubts, don't believe. But don't stop searching. That night, Sophia opened her notebook to a fresh page and wrote in large, steady handwriting. I will keep searching, until the one who never changes speaks to me. A few days passed. Sophia began to pray, but not in the traditional sense. She didn't yet know how to perform the Muslim prayer. But every night she found herself sitting on the floor with the book Rifki had given her, cross-legged, her palms open in her lap, eyes wet. Her lips whispered half-understood Arabic, and her chest trembled with questions she no longer feared asking. She began learning in secret. She downloaded videos on how to pray, writing down the movements step by step, repeating the words, fumbling at first but growing steadier each day. She didn't understand the meanings fully, but every syllable seemed to break something open inside her. One night she stayed in sujud, prostration, longer than usual. Her forehead rested on the mat, her heart heavy but peaceful. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was pretending. The next morning, she met Rifki at the park. They didn't talk much. Just sat together in silence, letting the wind speak between them. But after a few minutes she broke it. "I want to keep searching," she said quietly. "But I also want to know, what would it be like if I took the Shahida?" Rifki looked at her, his face gentle but serious. "That's not a door you can open halfway, Sophia," he said. "If you're going to walk through, you need to come in with your eyes open and your heart awake." She nodded slowly. She wasn't ready to respond. But something in her eyes had changed. There was no fear in them anymore. A few days later, Rifki introduced her to a Muslim family living a few blocks away. It was a small, humble home filled with warmth and simplicity. There, in a softly lit room with only 3 women present, Sophia sat on a cushion and whispered the words of Shahida, slowly, her voice trembling but clear. "I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger." No one clapped. No one cried loudly. There was only silence. A kind of sacred stillness. One of the women leaned in and hugged her gently. "Welcome," she whispered into Sophia's ear. Sophia held her breath. It felt like standing in a doorway she never knew existed, yet it had always been waiting for her. She didn't cry. Not then. But her soul exhaled. That night, she walked home alone. The Berlin sky was sprinkled with stars. Halfway down the block, she reached up and removed the last earring she had forgotten to take off. She held it in her hand for a moment before slipping it into her coat pocket. At home, she stood in front of the mirror. She wore a plain gray robe and a thin headscarf draped loosely around her head. Her face looked unfamiliar, but whole. She rubbed her cheek gently and looked into her own eyes like she was meeting someone she'd lost a long time ago. The call to prayer rang softly from a nearby mosque. She left the apartment and walked slowly toward it. Her pace was steady, even though a few people on the street turned to stare. She didn't look back. Inside, the women's prayer section was nearly empty. Only 5 women sat on prayer rugs in quiet reflection. But to Sophia, it felt like another universe. Foreign, yes. But not hostile. Not anymore. After the Maghrib prayer, one of the women turned and sat beside her. She smiled softly. "Have you just converted?" she asked. Sophia nodded. "I don't know where to start yet." The woman smiled even wider. "Then start with the question that brought you here." Sophia lowered her eyes and returned the smile. "A question," she repeated, almost like a prayer. Later that week, Sophia took a train to Frankfurt, her hometown. Her heart pounded the entire journey. In her backpack were only a few changes of clothes, a book of Quranic interpretation, and a letter she had written to her father. When she arrived, she stood in front of the door for what felt like hours. Her mother answered. Her face stiffened as soon as she saw the headscarf. "I want to talk, Mom," Sophia said, holding back emotion. "Just talk." Her mother didn't step aside. Just stood in the doorway, unmoving. Her father appeared moments later, standing silently behind her mother. Sophia reached into her bag and pulled out the letter. She held it out. "I know this is hard. If you can't accept it now, it's okay. But please read this later." No one spoke. But her father reached forward and took the letter. Sophia bowed her head slightly, took 2 steps back, and turned away. On the train ride home, she stared out the window. Her eyes remained dry, but her heart felt stitched. Not healed. But no longer broken. In her lap was a small Qur'an. She read silently, not aloud. Just lips moving gently, like whispering to her own soul. The next day, she walked into a fabric shop and bought a piece of dark green cloth. Back at her apartment, she spread it out, took her measurements, and began sewing her first mukina, a prayer outfit. Her fingers fumbled with the needle. She pricked herself more than once. But she laughed quietly as she worked. I can't believe I'm making something I never thought I'd wear. On Eid morning, Sophia stood among a sea of unfamiliar faces at the mosque. She had no family beside her. No friends. Just herself, and her quiet certainty. The Imam's voice echoed in takbir. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. As the prayer began, Sophia followed the women's movements. She was slow. Unsure. But when she lowered herself into sujud, something inside her surrendered fully. She didn't notice the tears until her cheek touched the carpet. After the prayer ended, she didn't rush home. She sat under a tree outside the mosque, watching people embrace, laugh, share food. She breathed in deeply and said to herself, if this isn't truth, then why does my heart feel like it finally stopped fighting? A few weeks later, an Islamic center emailed her, inviting her to share her story in a small gathering of new Muslims. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then typed back, I'm not a good speaker. But I'll come. The room was small, just 20 chairs arranged in a circle. The forum for new Muslims was held in a modest Islamic center tucked between two residential buildings. Sophia hesitated at the door, a folded piece of paper in her hand. She had written everything she thought she wanted to say, yet now the words felt heavy, like stones in her palm. When her name was called, she stood slowly and walked to the front. Everyone turned toward her, eyes filled with curiosity and gentleness. She unfolded the paper, then folded it again. I don't have a dramatic story, she began. No miracles. No visions. Just a silence that grew louder the more I ignored it. The room was silent, as if holding its breath. I used to think Islam was an ancient structure, she continued. Rigid. Imposing. Something to tear down. But the more I challenged it, the more I realized I was the fragile one. Islam wasn't the building. It was the foundation. Her fingers trembled slightly as she gripped the mic. I'm not perfect. I'm still learning. But for the first time in my life, I'm not running from who I really am. She sat back down. There was no applause, no eruption of emotion. Just quiet nods, and one soft, Allahu Akbar, whispered by someone in the back. After the session, a young woman approached her, hijab loosely wrapped, eyes full of uncertainty. I'm not ready to take the Shahada, she said nervously. But your story, it makes me want to learn more. Sophia smiled and gently touched her hand. Don't rush. Come slowly. The truth never runs from you. It waits. That night, Sophia walked home through the quiet Berlin streets. Her breath curled in the cold air. She passed the same nightclub she once called home, its music thumping, the lights flashing across the sidewalk. Once, that sound had called to her like a heartbeat. Now it felt like an echo from a life that belonged to someone else. The bouncer at the door, the same man who used to smile and greet her, looked up. Their eyes met. She nodded politely, kept walking. He didn't say a word. In the following weeks, Sophia's life found a strange rhythm. Mornings began with Far, still fumbled and whispered, but no longer foreign. She volunteered at a local Muslim refugee center, teaching German to women who had just arrived in the country. She helped them fill forms, learn bus routes, and write resumes. In between classes, she wrote. At first, it was just private journaling. Then, slowly, her words grew into essays, reflections, short poems about loss, identity, faith, and rediscovery. Eventually, she compiled her notes into a small self-published book titled What I Was Looking For Was Never Far Away. The book didn't contain stories of divine signs or supernatural events. It didn't speak of dreams or angels. It was just human. Honest. The messy journey of a woman who had questioned everything and slowly pieced herself back together. I didn't come to Islam because I was forced, she wrote in the preface. I came because there was no longer anywhere left to hide from the truth that was silently calling me. One cool autumn afternoon, Sophia sat on the veranda of her apartment with a cup of tea. Brown leaves danced in the wind. In her lap was a letter, a real one, ink on paper. She had just returned from the mailbox and recognized the handwriting instantly. Her father. She opened it slowly, hands shaking. The letter was short, carefully written. He spoke of childhood memories, of how stubborn she had always been, how she had once refused to eat unless she could wear her favorite red shoes. But toward the end, his tone changed. I still don't understand your decision, he wrote. But I see now that you made it with thought, not impulse. And for that, I'm proud. Even if I'm not ready to say it out loud. Sophia's eyes stung with tears, but not sorrow. She placed the letter in a small wooden drawer beside her prayer mat, right next to a photograph of the mosque where she had prostrated for the first time. She folded her arms across her chest and whispered, "Thank you?" She didn't know who she was speaking to, maybe to Allah, maybe to herself, but it didn't matter. It was enough. Not every day was easy. Some friends had disappeared without a word. Others left passive-aggressive messages like, "You're not really you anymore, Saf." She had typed replies many times, only to delete them. Eventually, she sent just one message back to a close friend. "Maybe I'm not who I used to be. But maybe that's not a bad thing." She had traded clubs for classrooms, noise for silence, rebellion for resilience. The scarf around her head wasn't always perfect. Sometimes her hair slipped out, and she'd blush while fixing it. But each time she adjusted it, it felt more natural. Like pulling a thread of herself back together. One evening, she stood in front of her wardrobe, holding up a long-sleeved dress. She paused. Not because she questioned it, but because she realized this wasn't a costume anymore. This was her. It was well past midnight when Sophia stood facing the Qibla. The lights in her apartment were dimmed. The city outside was fast asleep. In the silence, the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees were the only sounds that remained. She raised her hands, whispered softly in Arabic, still stuttering through certain phrases, and then bowed, her movements slow and reverent. Her prayer was far from perfect. But it was real. She remained in sujud longer than usual, her forehead pressed to the mat. Her breath was calm, her heart full. And then, as if pulled from a place deeper than words, she spoke aloud in a whisper. "Guide me to the straight path, even if I lose everything else." That night, she slept peacefully for the first time in months. In the following weeks, her days moved with a rhythm that had once felt impossible. Prayer, study, volunteering, and long walks where she listened to Qur'an recitations she couldn't yet understand but felt inexplicably drawn to. Some days were still hard. She still passed by old friends who barely looked at her. At the grocery store, a stranger once muttered something under his breath about brainwashed converts. She heard it. She didn't flinch. She only smiled softly and turned the other cheek. One day, as she sat in the mosque after Asr prayer, an elderly woman approached her. "You're new, yes?" the woman asked gently. Sophia nodded. The woman sat beside her. "I was born into Islam," she said. "You walk to it. That walk, it has weight. It's a blessing most of us forget." Sophia's eyes filled with quiet tears. She had often felt like an outsider, unsure of the rituals, fearful of making a mistake. But now, for the first time, someone saw her journey, not as a flaw, but as a form of strength. That week, the imam of the mosque invited her to share a few words after a women's circle. She hesitated at first, but then remembered the girl who once sat crying on a park bench, unsure of anything. Sophia stood before the group and said simply, "I didn't come to Islam to change who I was. I came to find who I was beneath all the noise." The women nodded. Some cried. Others just smiled. Afterward, one young girl, barely 20, approached her with trembling hands. "I've been too afraid to start," she said. "Afraid of losing my parents, my friends, my identity." Sophia took her hands gently. You won't lose yourself. You'll uncover yourself. Everything else will fall into place, or fall away. And maybe that's okay. The girl wiped her eyes. But what if I'm not strong enough? You don't need to be, Sophia replied. You just need to be honest. Strength comes later. That winter, Sophia received an email from a publishing house that had read her small book. They wanted to reprint it professionally, to distribute it to new Muslim support centers across Europe. She stared at the email for a long time before replying, hands trembling. Her story, once a secret she didn't know how to name, was now becoming a source of light for others. She made dua that night, thanking Allah not for fame, but for clarity. For allowing her to finally be still. Sophia's life didn't turn into a fairy tale. She didn't gain hundreds of new friends or reconcile magically with every person she had lost. But her heart became anchored. One spring afternoon, she visited a refugee center where she taught once a week. A Syrian woman who barely spoke German pressed something into her hand before leaving. It was a small handmade card with a simple Arabic word written in neat, crooked handwriting. Hidayah. Guidance. Sophia held the card to her chest. Later that day, she returned to the small wooden drawer beside her prayer mat. She reread her father's letter. Then she picked up the photo of the mosque where she had taken her first sujud and added the card beside it. Truth. Family. Home. They all now lived side by side. One day, walking home from the library, she paused outside her old apartment, the one she lived in before everything changed. Her old neighbor stepped out, shocked at the sight of her scarf. Sophia? He asked, blinking. You look different. She smiled. Maybe I am. What happened to you? She looked up at the sky. I stopped lying to myself. He nodded slowly. You look happy. I am, she said. Finally. That night, Sophia stood before the mirror again, as she had so many nights before. But this time, she wasn't questioning who she had become. She knew. She wasn't just Sophia, the former party girl, the marketing genius, the girl who used to laugh at prayer. She was now Sophia, the seeker, the listener, the one who prostrated not out of tradition, but out of truth. As the call to prayer echoed faintly from a nearby mosque, she smiled. Not because it was beautiful, but because it no longer felt foreign. It felt like home. She walked to the mosque slowly, taking her time. She entered the women's section and found her place near the back, where she had first sat. As she bowed and prostrated with the others, tears spilled onto the carpet, not of sadness, but of quiet, unshakable peace. When the prayer ended, she whispered to herself, If this is not truth, then why does my soul feel finally whole?